Welcome to the discussion on safeguarding India's democracy and civil society, countering the China challenge. My name is Kalpana Pandey, a research associate at Indic Researchers Forum. Indic Researchers Forum is a security think tank focusing on issues pertaining to national security and geopolitics. A recent report by Microsoft Threat Intelligence reveals that China may use artificial intelligence generated content to manipulate general elections in India, South Korea, and USA. Though the chances of it impacting the poll results remain low, however, an increasing Chinese involvement in such activity remains a cause of serious concern for democracies and open societies around the world. To discuss the China challenge for Indian democracy and civil society, we are honored to have Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar sir and Cleo Pascal ma'am. Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar is retired Director General of Artillery. He is now a professor in the Aerospace Department of Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Next, we have Cleo Pascal ma'am, who is non-resident senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, focusing on the Indo-Pacific region, in particular the Pacific Island and India. She has testified before the US Congress, regularly lectures and moderate for seminar for the US military, and has taught at defense colleges in the United States, United Kingdom, India, Canada, and Oman. From 2006 to 2022, she was an associate fellow at Chatham House, London, where, among other responsibility, she was research lead on the multi-year future project, Perspective on Strategic Shift in the Indo-Pacific 2019-24. She is widely published in the academic and popular press.
Thanks a lot. It's indeed an honor for me to be called over for this particular web discussion on countering China and safeguarding our democracies. And this is overall, I think the concept is very nice and broad. And we all know that China uses its three warfare strategies and influences people and democracies and elections. And this is the right time for it to do whatever it wants to do. Right? The second thing is India is going through its own elections. Like it has been rightly brought out, the chances of China influencing Indian elections are pretty bleak. For the simple reason, China did try to influence the Taiwanese elections. Everyone says Mr. William Lai Ching-te won the Taiwanese elections, but who lost the Taiwanese elections? It was China, right? So that's the way I look at it. But notwithstanding that, they will carry out their influence operations. They will impress upon civil society, which in India, for many reasons, there is vulnerable to all this. After all, we have to remember that we have a communist government in Kerala. We had a communist government in Tripura, as also West Bengal, till a few years back. And we've also had left-wing extremism gripping our country in large swathes. Plus the fact that China and Pakistan have a collusive outlook, especially regarding the JNK. And then there's always strife and the ongoing strife in unsettled Northeast, where China can do a lot of damage to India, its civil society. And I would go to the extent of saying the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the nation. So we have to discuss all this in this framework. But before I give my thoughts out further, I'd like to invite Mrs. Cleo Pascal to give her views, because I think her views, looking at it from outside, are important. One. And two, she's been a voice whom I've always respected, and with a lot of reason, logic. And actually, I look forward to her views. Once she puts her views across on this entire subject, I'll put my views across, and then maybe we can have a question for each other. Madam, over to you.
Thank you very much, General. This is a huge and daunting honor. I've learned an incredible amount from the way India has handled the unrestricted warfare that China has launched against it. And just to give sort of some concept of how I've seen it, we were talking before starting about the effect of Galwan, and of course the first major visible response to Galwan, launched by India, was the banning of the 59 apps, including TikTok and WeChat, which are those are political warfare weapons, and those are things that other countries haven't managed to do. The U.S. they're still debating it. I'm in Washington at the moment. They're still debating whether or not to ban TikTok or not. And from that time on, it became very clear that yes, China's got this unrestricted warfare approach to trying to degrade India, in large part because India is actually an existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party. India puts lie to all of the justifications that the Chinese Communist Party has for its existence. And if you think about what are China's goals, the number one goal, because China is actually what we're talking about, the Chinese Communist Party, is the preservation of the Chinese Communist Party. The second goal is to be number one in the world in terms of comprehensive national power, which we can talk about later if you're interested. But the legitimacy of the party is critical. And the justification for the Chinese Communist Party rests on things like it takes an authoritarian regime to run a country of over 1 billion people. Well, right next door, you have a country of over 1 billion people that's a democracy and it's doing fine. Or you need an authoritarian regime to have economic growth for a country of over 1 billion people. Right next door, you have India, which is, in fact, growing more than China. Or the Chinese will say, you know, we've got problems with religious minorities and we're going to put 1 million in concentration camps. India has a very different approach to pluralistic society, and ups and downs, but definitely a much better place to be. So all of these elements of the justification for the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party are undermined by the mere success of India. So this is just to give an example of why the attack on India's democracy and on the success of India is actually quite a high priority for the Chinese Communist Party. And the fact that India has managed to not only resist but counter has been something that I learn from on a regular basis and speak to others about. So yes, after Galwan, you had the banning of the apps, and of course then you had the countering by the Chinese for things like the attack on the Mumbai electrical grid, the reinvigoration of the Maoists, the attack on the iPhone parts manufacturing plant, all of these kind of unrestricted warfare attacks to try to degrade India from the inside and to break India's relationship as with other countries, but also in the concept of being a supply possibility for redirection of supply chains. But India went after Xiaomi, did the money laundering, it did the foreign direct investment stuff. It's been a master class in how to protect yourself from this comprehensive national power push through a comprehensive national defense. So I don't really have much to add. I'm Canadian, so I apologize. At this very moment, there is an inquiry going on in Canada into foreign interference into Canadian elections, and there have been very concrete examples of Chinese interference in Canadian elections, which is not something that all the examples they're giving are not things that would be happening in India. So I'm certainly not here to criticize in any way what India has been doing. I'm here very much to learn, and in that spirit, I'd like to hand it back over to you, sir, to tell me what I need to know.
Oh, let me put it this way. I think you brought out a couple of very important points which everyone must understand. That China is, or rather, India is an existential threat to China, which is very important from an ideological point of view. Why? Anything which China does is political in nature. Their end game is political, and their ultimate goal is to keep CCP in power. If that doesn't happen, nothing else matters. to that extent, and they have been selling this story of their model of governance is the best for people and for growth and to prosper in the world, and that is the model which they are trying to impose on the world through their Sinocentric world order, which Xi Jinping, even in his 20th Party Congress, has spoken of global governance with the China's model. And he's reiterated it in the 2 sessions last month. So to that extent, India poses a existential threat. I couldn't agree with you more. Right. Now, the second point which you made of banning TikTok and other apps, which is something which only India has done and no one else has done. No one else has had the capability, or I won't say capability, they have all had the capability, has not had the will to put it through. Right. It is not only this, it is only India which has put maximum bans, or rather restricted Chinese investment in another country. We've done that in a big way. In fact, of late, we are driving Chinese companies away from India. Most of the companies they're crying, like Vivo, Xiaomi, and all that, because there have been huge fines slapped on the money laundering system they generated, and they've been taken to task. This is something, again, which is not happening outside. And I fear the Chinese are exploiting the Mexican route to get into USA by circumventing NAFTA, or rather using NAFTA. So that is something which whether USA will be able to ward off China through that route is to be seen. Whether the US politics will be able to do that. But then in India, one is very clear what is happening. So I'll get back to the issue of threat to China, and one has to look at it from a slightly different perspective. If you see the Chinese growth over the past 40, 50 years, it has grown with a lot of tailwinds from the West and from USA in particular. And China from 1979 has enjoyed a peace dividend, which has not happened for many countries. In fact, the only 2 other countries which are in this bracket of economy are Germany and Japan, which also were aided by USA to reconstruct their economy post the Second World War, and that's why they are at that level on the top 5 economies of the world. You contrast it with India. India has gone through multiple sanctions from USA till as late as, even now, the last purchase we did from Russia, S-400, is under some kind of sanction, or rather, there have been talks of it. We've had to go through all wars. We've never had a peace dividend. So we've had headwinds on our economy, right? And we have had so many other things. Despite this, India finds itself today 5th or 4th, whichever way you look at it, as one of the top economies in the world. And China is, of course, 2nd. There's no doubt about it. So there's a problem which China is facing. How is it that India, with all its plurality, with all its chaos, with all its different kind of political kind of a thinking, right, and a social setup which is quite fractured, still is able to reach this level? And where a monolith China, right, with a unitary form of government and a unitary form of thinking, is not able to do it. And it is, when you look at it from that construct, you find that China does face a great threat. On that, I have never had a doubt, right? And it is on this fact I would like you to comment, because I don't know whether you looked at it from this point of view. So your views on this kind of a theory which I'm trying to put across.
Yeah, so this is it's veering a little bit into the philosophical, but one of the looking at it from a different point, looking at it from the Chinese perspective, one of the and you very rightly centralize this around the Chinese Communist Party. So when I talk about China, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party. They need obedience. and it's a structure designed for submission and for obedience, right? That fundamentally. But the things that give people a sense of self and inner strength are often their faith and their family and a sense of freedom. Those three things, but particularly the first two, are the latitude and longitude of most human beings. They give you a sense of what's correct behavior, where you're trying to head in life, how you're dealing with the people around you. The Chinese Communist Party find faith and family to be in direct competition to obedience to the party. And so they have deliberately tried to destroy faith and all faiths, from, I mean, it could be Falun Gong, or it could be the Uyghurs, or it could be Christians, whatever. Anybody of faith is a threat to the Chinese Communist Party because your loyalty isn't to the party. And through the one-child policy, they destroyed family. So you have a generation of people who have no brothers or sisters. They don't know how to share. They haven't grown up with that push and pull that you get in an extended family system in India, for example. So most of the world, and we saw this very clearly with the G20, most of the world as individuals live much more like an Indian would live, where they have, the family is very important, their faith, and it doesn't have to even be faith in religion, it could be faith in community, but just something bigger than yourself is really shapes your environment. And that's why I think you saw such a positive response to the G20 meeting in India. How you really saw it in place, like bringing in the African Union. There was a genuine warmth to this other way of doing things, not the Western way of doing things and not the Chinese way of doing things, but a way that is very human-centric. And that I've talked about this before, but that whole concept of the world as one family, family is not easy. Family is complicated and hard, and you don't necessarily love or like all your family, but you're stuck together, so you've got to make it work. And that is a very different vision than the one that the Chinese Communist Party is offering, and I would argue it's a much more human one. And so you can have these centralized authoritarian, these dictatorships, but they're very brittle, and they're dependent, ultimately become dependent on increasing authoritarianism and control. And once that control slips, it can crash very quickly. But what you described is kind of as chaotic or pluralist, that's actually what that means is it's adaptive. It can adjust. There's room for movement. It can breathe. I mean, it's the very nature of democracy, and it might be slower to get where it's going, but it's much more ultimately stable. So for me, just from the way that you're framing it, that's how I see it. Is again, this is a fundamental clash of worldviews, and I would argue one of them is this sort of institutional, authoritarian, fundamentally unhuman, unnatural way of structuring a society that doesn't bring the best out of its own population. And whereas I think the other model that's being presented and exemplified by India in this context is ultimately it's not only morally right or morally better, it works. It's much more human. So that's how I would see it.
I think you brought up some very good points. And the first thing is about the point that this is a nation which doesn't have brothers and sisters.
Mhm.
I mean, look at the lopsidedness of this nation, which doesn't, the whole nation doesn't know what a brother, a sister, or an aunt or an uncle is. So it puts a huge, embargo on the very fundamental concept of a family, because one part of a family is completely missing. I mean, I can't think of growing up without a brother and a sister. I couldn't have, or I can't think of my children growing without brothers and sisters. And I can talk of children in plural. Most Chinese don't talk of children; they talk of only child. So there's a huge societal fracture which is on the cards, the way I look at it. And then, of course, you highlighted the inclusive nature of India and how we took the G20 along, and how we took the the African Union. In fact, the African Union president went as far as to say that India is a superpower. Well, leave that metaphor aside. What you actually highlighted is China with it has is socially fragile at this point of time. And as it increases its social fragility, its authoritarianism is going to increase. And if you actually cold-heartedly look at China, the way they think they're going about things, they're looking at trying to replace USA at one level, and also trying to contain India at the other level. Because these are the two major countries which actually pose a threat to the Chinese model and their Chinese destiny. So how do you think this will pan out? How do you think authoritarian China will try to tackle both USA and India? Because at this point of time, it is worried that the India-US strategic relationship is growing despite all odds and ends, and it is trying its best to keep both apart and trying to deal with each independently.
Yes, and they're using and they're trying to create fractures in the relationship. And what China's very good at doing is identifying real grievances and then exacerbating them and then leading you to the wrong conclusion. So, you can have a problem just as a complete hypothetical with an ambassador who may not be saying all the right things. And then that can be blown up through social media if they have access to your social media to try to say that this ambassador represents that entire country, and so you need to close the door on that entire country, or vice versa. So they're very good at that, but Indian diplomats are highly sophisticated, and they know that, for example, if you're dealing with the United States, there are a lot of different United States. State Department is different than Department of Defense, which is different than the American people, which is different than Congress. There's a lot of different United States, and those there are a lot of other relationships that are very strong. We spoke a bit about the strength of India's society. I am. And yes, the U.S. is a big threat. Taiwan is, of course, also a big threat. The geography of Taiwan is a big issue, but also it shows that ethnic Chinese do even better under freedom than they do. Yeah. So from an ideological perspective, Taiwan is a threat. But you mentioned Mexico, and so the very big concern here, I'm in Washington at the moment, is who's coming across that border, right? I mean, that there are millions of people now in this past administration that have come into the U.S. Undocumented, and the military-aged single male Chinese with military haircuts who seem to have a lot of disposable cash to come in through different routes these are very large numbers, and they're disappearing into the country. And I was at a presentation this morning which discussed the origins of the United Front work that China's been doing since the 1920s. They were trained by the Bolsheviks to do this kind of infiltration work. And one of the things that they did very successfully was they put the communists put people into low levels of the nationalist Chinese army, and they slowly rose through the ranks. And in some cases, they didn't have any touch with their commanders for decades. And then when the time came, they took their entire unit off the battlefield. They flipped their whole unit. They took them all off. So the idea of infiltration, getting into the systems and lying dormant until the time comes is something that has been very successful for the Chinese Communist Party for a very long time. And we're starting to see indications of that sort of a thing potentially popping up. So I mentioned in Canada, one of the cases that came up at this hearing was there was one electoral riding, which is a very safe Liberal Party seat. So the election wasn't as important as the primary, where the candidate for the Liberal Party is chosen, because whoever was chosen as that candidate would undoubtedly be elected. And in that election, for who the candidate would be, you didn't have to be a Canadian citizen. And so they bussed in Chinese international students to come into that riding to vote for the preferred candidate of the Chinese Communist Party, effectively. That's what came out in this hearing. So I'm extremely concerned about what's happening at a operational and societal level. And just the other quick thing is what's happening with fentanyl, with the Chinese fentanyl on the streets in the US is fentanyl last year in the US killed over 70,000 Americans. That's more than the Vietnam War in 1 year. And the numbers are going up. And the Chinese could turn it off. China doesn't have a fentanyl problem. They could turn it off. And the precursors are going, they're running through the Chinese organized crime structures. And that's another element of the Chinese Communist Party's operations, is using criminal elements as effectively shock troops in moving forward their operations. So I'm much more concerned about what's happening in the US, actually, at a societal level than and how China is and other countries, but specifically China is running amok. We can see it again with this TikTok stuff than I am with India. I'm very, very concerned, actually.
Yeah, actually, you brought up something very important. How China can infiltrate at the societal level and break societies.
Mhm.
And the example of the human infiltration through the migration which is happening across the southern border of USA, and the fentanyl is a major problem, there's no doubt. And I think USA has to find new solutions to this old problem, because this is not new. The problem is not new, it's only the borders which have changed and the drugs which have changed. Earlier it used to be meth, today it is fentanyl. Right. Let me get back, because most of our young audience would be more interested in the China-India construct. Oh, as you see China becoming more authoritative and being more inventive in the way it can infiltrate and subvert other societies, and the way India is constructed, how do you see this going forward? Especially in view of the fact, as India is rising, China is declining. And China, there's a clear need to contain India. And as late as yesterday, I saw a tweet by Global Times, which emphasizes why Elon Musk should not invest in India.
Mhm.
And all these activities are going on. So how do you think China will approach this issue, and how do you think India should ward it off?
So that overt stuff, the China Times stuff, it's helpful because it gives you an indication of where they're targeting, but their use of proxies can be quite effective. So that's, and remember that, the book Unrestricted Warfare by the two PLA Air Force colonels, right? It actually mentions 24 different or over 24 different warfares. And I think that India domestically, you have an extremely good strategic community and you're tracking it very closely. But they will try to hit you off the sides. So that's the sort of thing like putting out the counterfeit Indian medicine in Africa to try to discredit Indian pharmaceuticals. Blowing up stories about Indian corruption or criminal activity, which may or may not be accurate. The kind of trying to discredit India and to isolate India, because the coalition that India is putting together and that we saw so clearly in the G20 is a mortal blow to China's concept of making itself the middle power. And IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, was a very elegant solution to a lot of problems. But any solution that you put forward, anything you try to build, will be a threat to the CCP. So they will try to attack it. So anything that you build, anything positive that doesn't have a defense component to it, is vulnerable. And IMEC comes up, and then Gaza blows up, and then where's IMEC? It has to wait for that to resolve. So I think that Gawan was a head-on strike, and it failed. And then you started to see a lot of it wasn't new, but it was increasing kind of proxy or unrestricted warfare type attacks, like the grid and all that sort of stuff. But you will increasingly see it externally as well. I think India had a big advantage until Gawan, which was that the Chinese underestimated you. If you look at the book Unrestricted Warfare, again, they go deep into Clausewitz, and they look at all the European and all the Western strategists, and all the Chinese strategists, and they don't mention, or the Arthashastra. They don't, there's nothing, the whole Indian strategic huge body of knowledge is invisible. And so they underestimated India. I mean, as you said, India's been at war since it was born. I mean, it has extremely good war fighters and strategists. There's been, up and down on the political side, but India's been capable of doing it if given a chance. And the fact that you were underestimated by China gave you some maneuvering room, but after Gawan, I think less so. And now you're starting to see more of I think they've probably dedicated more people to try to figure out how to contain India, which doesn't just mean domestic. It also means in Africa, in other parts of Asia, and in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, if what you outlined is, if anything, the threat from China has increased post-Galwan.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue of the differential between India and China closing on many fronts, right? I mean, those of us who are used to the fact that China's GDP is 4 times that of India and all that, that's the standard claptrap which comes out of China. But when you look at it from the Chinese prism, Chinese talk of the comprehensive national power. When you look at the comprehensive national power of China and when you look at the comprehensive national power of India, I don't think there's much difference. Because like you rightly said, they've underestimated the inherent strength of India as part of being its comprehensive national power. Well, having said all this, very clearly the threat is increasing from China as India rises for many reasons. Okay, it is my thinking that India and China are entering into a Cold War. While the world is focused on a different Cold War between China and USA, and it is a grouping forming between Russia, Iran, China, North Korea on one side, the Western construct on the other side. There is also Cold War brewing between India and China. Your views on that? I'll be more than interested in your views, and I'll factor them in tomorrow when I'm going to do my discourse on Ganashot.
Okay, thank you. No, I think, you know, I think you're obviously right. And again, one of the big things that happened with Galwan was the coming together of the population and the strategic community to see it in a similar way. So if you're going to have a Cold War, the population needs to understand what's going on. And in the case of India, I think the population is very on board with it, and they understand this threat, and it's made a huge difference. I think also, odd as it sounds, I think India's success at the G20 also was a big flag for China. You know, India can do things that China can't. You know, it can connect to other countries in ways that are much less threatening for their strategic communities, that can deliver in development in ways that aren't so incredibly socially destructive. You know, when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, you know, that's actually, BRI could also stand for Bribery and Repression Initiative, right? Yeah, because that's what they're exporting. They're exporting the system that they have domestically of corruption and repression. So that's not how India is seen. And so I think that as India starts to show itself more, and that very much includes the Indian population. There's I've been lucky enough to be going to India for a very long time, and young Indians have casual self-confidence in their eyes that is quite glorious to see, actually. You know, you really have to prove yourself to them now. And that shows, and it's also, it attracts people to you. You know, when you see a young country doing well, working hard, and innovating, and just trying to get on with life in a context of normalcy, you know, where you have your families and you have all this other stuff, you know, it draws people to you. So that is a huge threat to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, it really is. So the Cold War, I mean, I do think it's increasing, and it's partially because India is starting to come into its own, but also because China is starting to see how other people are seeing India, and that's making them take India a lot more seriously. Apart from just, I mean, you were not neighbors, right? You weren't neighbors until China ate Tibet. Right? So this is a new way of thinking about each other, which India has definitely done now. And it's took a while, but it's gearing up. And as as you're talking about the infrastructure and things like that, China can't it can't ignore or threat deflate on India anymore. US, I don't know what's going to happen with the US. I don't know what's going to happen with Europe, but the trajectory of India is rising. So if you're thinking 20 years or 30 years down the line and you're the Chinese Communist Party and you're thinking about 2049 and you're going to be the center of the universe and all that sort of stuff, the horse coming up from the inside is India.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you summed it up beautifully. And I think we'll leave it at that and we'll hand it over back to our interlocutor who will, any questions you have, please shoot. We'll answer them. Those of you attending.
So we do have some questions. Yeah. Kalpana, you are there. You can take the question from the chat box.
Sure, sir. First question we have is, we talk about elections in India. The major focus is on the general elections, which is valid. However, what about the simultaneous state elections happening in India's eastern sector in the state of Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh? How does China take advantage of this? And does the recent renaming and even claiming some names are similar to Indian official names like Tatsing of 30 locations have any linkages?
Okay, let me take this on because it will be unfair for this question to go to Cleo. Look, this will have absolutely no... Okay, let me put it in a different manner altogether. China cannot interfere with Indian elections at all. The first thing which I must tell everyone is that China tried to interfere in Taiwanese elections and it lost. Like I said earlier, Honorable William Ling Chengte Lei has won the Taiwanese elections and China lost the elections. So that's the way I look at it. China cannot, because China doesn't understand Indian elections for many reasons. Even I don't understand my elections. So how can China understand it? That's the first thing. And you must also grant some intelligence to our politicians. I feel, this is my feeling, and this is not only my feeling, this is also the feeling of many of my friends at my age. And we've conducted elections all over the country in very difficult conditions. They feel that if the Indian politicians and our government employs half the tricks, not even half, 1/4 of the tricks and information warfare which they do during elections on each other, China will be left in the heap. They won't know what's hit them. So our elections are very keenly contested. The kind of information warfare which political parties unleash on each other has to be seen to be believed. Right? So their ability to, this thing is all gone. The very renaming of all these places in Arunachal will ensure that those parties which China thinks it is supporting will fall. They'll have the opposite effect. Whatever China does today in terms of trying to influence elections will have the opposite effect, except in a few places. And we have to be clear about that. And those few places are not Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh, don't worry. They're far down in the south, where there is still a communist government in place. There, things might have a different viewpoint altogether. Because that's the way that state is constructed even today. Yeah, I think next question. Let's take it.
Yes, sir. So next question is about misinformation, spreading the misinformation. And the question is from Rajdeep. He asked that there are many AI apps now available, like to make AI-generated videos, AI voice, and so forth. And every person in India uses a smartphone, usually, especially in rural India, with not much awareness about how to differentiate between what is AI-generated and what is not. And the question is like, how much extent in the coming election and the future scenario it has potential to create chaos among citizens?
Look, I've conducted elections in Punjab. I've conducted elections in J&K. I've conducted elections in the Northeast. And in difficult times, one thing you cannot fool the average Indian voter is his ability to see through all this. So I don't think any such influence can happen. And the average Indian voter is quite adept and quite, intelligent enough to think what is right for the country and what is not right for the country. Sometime back, long back, I was speaking to a voter, and the thing Gyan he gave me was, I said, why do you vote differently in the state and differently for the center? So the simple answer they gave me was, साहब पावर ना एक ही आदमी या एक ही पार्टी में किसी को देना नहीं चाहिए, अलग अलग रखो तो सही रहेगा. वो क्या है, वो बैलेंस रहता है, ठीक है ना, तो संतुलन रहता है. So that is the Gyan, the native Gyan of the Indian voter. I have trust. AI and all, remember one thing, AI overdoes things. When beyond a point, AI comes across as artificial. So the naturalness of AI is poor. So to that extent, I'm sanguine things it will not affect people so badly.
So with
In fact,
yeah.
Let me put it, AI is being used by all sides. All sides. So what comes across is so much AI coming from all sides means that the Indian voter has the capability, of seeing everything through and taking a balanced decision, which India has always done. The Indian voter has always done. Remember, 75 years, we've had so many transfers of power and absolutely peacefully, with no problems whatsoever. You didn't see this happening in the most evolved democracy called USA 4 years back when there was an insurrection of kinds. Such things never happened, right? We went through a period of emergency and then came out of it. How? Peacefully. Because at the end of the day, Mrs. Indira Gandhi felt the need to go back to the people. And no party in India can rule India without being democratic. Okay? Because every mohalla, the parties change. So there is no absolute. And you must also remember, if you see the statistics of Indian elections, right? No party in India has come to power with more than 30% of vote, or 30 to 35% of popular vote, or first past the system kind of election, right? It's not like the presidential form of a government where a person, you vote for one or the second person. You have so many parties to choose from. Even BJP in the last elections, just got about 34% popular vote. With 34% popular vote, it got so many seats. So I'm very clear that things will be balanced, and influence and all will have its own balance. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So with your permission, the next question is to you, sir.
Okay.
The question is, considering the complexities of regional dynamics in Northeast India, do you perceive a potential threat from China exploiting ethnic disparity to foment internal disruptions, thereby attempting to jeopardizing India's internal security?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a very valid question. I've been serving in the Northeast ever since 1980, on and off, and I've seen the change which has happened over the years. Let me give you an experience. Way back in 1991, I was in Assam, and there people spoke to me as if I'm an outsider in Assam. And the same place in Assam, when I went back in 2010, not 2010, but 2005, 2006, things were completely different. People have changed. The people have changed. What makes a nation is the people. And when people start changing, you can't stop that change. And I feel that change has happened to a large extent in all parts of the Northeast. And all parts of the Northeast also realize the problem of what is across the border in China. What they also recognize to a large extent the problems of across in a place like Bangladesh with the Islamic influence. Right? And people don't want. And why do people come from Bangladesh into India? For a better life. Understand that fundamental thing. So the outside influences are not there. There's large, in fact, I see very few people who don't want to be with India, and to that extent, I am okay. But the problem which I see in India is Manipur. Manipur is the problem, and Manipur is the problem because it went normal. After all, one has to understand that from Manipur we have some of our best sportsmen, whether they're hockey players, or weightlifters, and what have you, and they've got this Olympic medals and gold medals and what have you. And that's a state with a lot of potential. And it's a state which is a multi-ethnic state with Kukis, Nagas, and Meiteis. It has its divisions. It had its problems. I thought in the past 3-4 years things had quietened down, but in the last 1 year, what has one seen is this thing, coming back due to political ideologies. It's more internal politics than external politics. The thing which concerns me a bit is there's strife in Myanmar, and Myanmar, the strife is drug, driven. Drug driven because opium trade in Afghanistan has stopped completely because the Taliban have banned opium in Afghanistan. So opium growth has doubled or tripled in Myanmar, and it already had a thriving meth trade. Basically, part of the fentanyl thing, which Madam Cleo Pascal was also talking of. So Myanmar is a drug-driven state. The money, everything, politics goes around drugs, and a lot of that drug money, the militants in Manipur are utilizing. So the linkages between drugs and that criminality is going up, and it has found its shadow in the politics. So that's my worry. I hope after these elections, once the election and vote catching favor is out, someone gets down and resolves the Manipur problem, because that's going to be a problem. But even there, I don't see an anti-national element coming in. It will be more internal issues. Yep.
So next question is from Saurav, and he is asking about India's position toward Taiwan contingency in case of official invasion of Taiwan by China, and also unofficial perversion by having close partnership with KMT.
Okay. I mean, the next question should go to Mrs. Cleo Pascal, because it's not fair that you ask all questions which are oriented towards India, right? So search one and then.
I'm very happy to just listen and learn. So please go
Look,
ahead.
the first thing I must tell you is I don't think China can invade Taiwan at all. At all. Right? This is my considered opinion. And this considered opinion I've already expressed in a Japanese channel. Okay? I've told them. And I've also put it across why, very recently, why Xi Jinping can't go to war. I did it with P Gurus. It was a joint program, and China can't go to war. If China has to go to war, it has to be by accident, not design. If China goes to war by design today, they lose wherever it goes. It doesn't matter whether it comes against India, Philippines, Japan, or Taiwan. These are the 4 places it goes. And maybe later this week, I'm going to give a detailed program as to what are the military aspects of invading Taiwan. Remember, from a very broad perspective, the Taiwan invasion is something like the Normandy invasion, which took place in the last century, when the Allies landed on Normandy, right, in 1944. It involved something like 7,000 ships. It involved something like 1 month of carpet bombing of Germany and France. It also involved using 18 to 20 ports of, the West England coast, right from Southampton to Dover, everyone. So if you see the scale, and after that also, the Allies struggled to go ahead. It wasn't a cakewalk. If Taiwan does 1/10, I'm saying 1/10 of what the Germans did against the Allies, China will flounder. The conditions in Taiwan for a cross-strait invasion against Taiwan are much worse. Okay, and the Chinese have had no experience whatsoever in amphibious operations. The last major amphibious operation in the world was done in Falklands when the Britishers did. They did it 8,000 kilometers away. They went to Malvinas and did what they had to do. After that, no one has done. Okay, and all these are of the last century. Today, you can't hide this invasion. First, so whatever happens, Taiwan is going to hurt China even more. Now, 17 ports you can't hide. And if those 17 ports of China are hurt, even minimally, China's economy will collapse. Right. This whole story is not going to finish one day. Understand the larger issue. It's going to take time. Because wars are not 1 week affairs, like we've learned. You've seen already the Gaza affair going on for 7 months. Ukraine is going on for 2 years. If Taiwan puts up minimal resistance, and if this whole thing goes for at least a month or two, which it will, right? That means Taiwan Straits closes. If Taiwan Straits closes, whose economy will get affected the most? China's. China's 17 ports, right from Shanghai down to Guangzhou, and even Hainan, everything will have to pack up. So China's trade will collapse. Okay. Over and above that, all the navies around Taiwan will react. The Yonaguni Island, which is a Japanese island, is just 100 kilometers off Taiwan. The nearest Philippines island is 100 kilometers south of Taiwan, Bashi Strait. Now, if China attacks Taiwan, invariably the Japanese forces will react, the Philippines forces will react. They will be forced to react. If these two react, the US forces will also react. So in which case, Taiwan will not be conquered. The biggest problem for China is in going across Taiwan is how to keep US out of the picture. They don't have a method. There is no guarantee that US will not come to aid. There's a lot of talk that US will not aid Taiwan and all. Is there a guarantee to it? If anything of USA gets hit, USA is at war with China. Will China want that? So all this talk about Taiwan and all is big talk. Nothing will happen. If for the past 75 years, 49 to now, nothing has happened, you think something is going to happen now? Especially when these Chinese have not had a fight for a long time. Also, you combine it with the fact that for the past 4 years, Xi Jinping and his gang are sitting across in eastern Ladakh and they're doing nothing. In fact, they came big way and they went back 9 kilometers except at Depsang and Demchok. They had to break their own bunkers and go back. 2020, you go back in August, those pictures are still live. And India has been able to mirror whatever they've done. It's a stalemate out there. What if China gets into a stalemate in Taiwan? In Taiwan, there's no stalemate. There's no stalemate in Taiwan. When you get into the sea, you're gone. You have to put that boot in the water, which China doesn't have the capability to do, and it doesn't have the guts to do. Then what is the impact of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan on Xi Jinping? War is a risky affair. What if he goes out of power? That's the second major thing which one has to understand about thing. Xi Jinping wants to be the greatest Chinese in their history, surpassing Mao and Deng Xiaoping. All this is at stake. So China's economy is at stake, its military reputation is at stake, and Xi Jinping's own reputation is at stake. You think he'll put all this and risk go to Taiwan and lose? If you look at it from this point of view, nothing will happen. Now, further, what can you do to prevent it? The more important thing is not a Chinese invasion. How do you prevent it? That is the bigger challenge. You prevent it by having better relations with Taiwan. You have prevented by USA generating more. That's what we were discussing. The trilateral, which is now going to emerge between Japan, Philippines, and USA, is very significant for Taiwan. It's not only significant for them because that if China is going to upset that trilateral, China is in trouble. So all these things put together, things are not so bad that China can do anything it wants. In fact, if anything, China can do nothing it wants today. And you also have to see today morning, I just downloaded certain data of China from Chinese sources. I'm not talking of China from Forbes or Newsweek and things like that. I'm talking of Chinese sources. Their imports are down, their exports are down. Okay, so it's not China is declining. I mean, the Chinese threat will increase for different purposes, but China per se is declining. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the next question is about India-Taiwan military collaboration. And the question is, what are collaboration taking place between Indian and Taiwanese military? And citing last year's 3 former defense chief visited Taiwan and had a closed door meeting.
Okay. Look, that the military cooperation between Taiwan and India is very low. Let me be very honest with you. It's just this kind of exchange which is happening. For the simple reason, the Taiwan-US military relation is very strong. You have to understand that all Taiwanese officers, most of the Taiwanese officers are trained in, USA. In USA, a lot of interaction takes place with Taiwan. That is as it may at this point of time. But is there a scope to increase the relationship? Yes. It has to be in stages. It can't be immediate. It has to be stage-wise. Is there a plan afoot? I think so. Right? Many things are not in the open domain, and I can't speak also the same. But things are happening. It's not as if things are not happening. And we also have to understand that Taiwan feels itself as vulnerable. Taiwan itself is vulnerable. Okay, because Taiwan is not a state, but it is a country with elections, and it's a rich country, good country, very dynamic country, dynamic people. Their thinking is different. I've interacted with the Taiwanese here also in Chennai with their consulate. They're in a state where they have a consulate here, but they can't call it a consulate. They call it a center, a cultural center or something like that. So they're caught actually. So they wouldn't like to overtly increase their, contact with India. You also have to understand, we also can't go beyond a point overtly for the simple reason, notwithstanding all our problems with China, we have a huge trade dependency on China. You can't wish it away. You can't wish it away because that trade dependency is because of the primary materials which you need from China. Okay? And API, active pharmaceutical ingredients. That is the bulk of the trade with China. Unless you get those APIs, you cannot value add and have a thriving pharma industry. Right? We are supposed to be the pharmacy of the world. That pharmacy won't function if you don't get materials from China. So you have a trade going with China. I mean, it is not as if you can wish it away. Are we doing something to reduce that? We are. Will it happen overnight? It will not happen overnight. It will take another decade for that to reverse. Have we started on that progress? Yes. So if you take all these things into consideration, there are limitations with what we can do with Taiwan. But what we can do with Taiwan is increase Taiwan-India trade, which is happening. The prime example of that is Foxconn. Now, Foxconn has shifted here, along with Apple, to set up factories here. Okay. And soon others will follow. So once that happens, things will start changing. That's how it is. And probably when Elon Musk or Tesla start setting up factories here, and maybe some things from Taiwan will automatically come, because I'm sure certain components of the entire supply chain of Tesla originate from Taiwan. So things will improve. It will take time, but.
Thank you, sir. And the next question, sir, is there was a report by India's Intelligence Bureau in 2014 stating the negative role of foreign-funded NGOs in India's developmental activities, costing us about 2 to 3% of GDP growth. It was evident from the farmers' protest. In the same way, there are reports of China's inclusion in American universities. How can we tackle this in the era of fourth-generation warfare?
You have to understand that as India rises, these attempts will be there, both from China and from the West. We have to be very clear. As you rise and as you become autonomous and self-dependent, China will try to contain you, and the West as a whole, US and Europe largely, will try to peg you down. That is their colonial mentality, which they have not let go. They have to come to terms with the fact that, look, India is breaking free of college shackles. And that is something which, your generation might not have experienced, my generation has experienced. I've gone through it. After all, I started my life in a British mindset. We broke out of that, now we are in a completely Indian mindset. Okay. So that will happen. We have to contend with it. And in any case, any country, which is whether it is developed or it is rising, will have to contend with these outside influences. I mean, you have to become internally strong for that. Okay. Whether it's the farmers' protest. Look, let me ask you a rhetorical question. Why did the farmers' protest take place? It is not as if that the farmers' protests didn't have problems. The protests were not genuine. They were genuine to a large extent. But the fact is, whenever such genuine protest takes place, they'll get hijacked. And that's what happened in the farmers' protest. Okay? Because, I mean, I can go into a discourse on why the farmers' protest took place, MSP, all that. But the fact is that unless we learn to solve our problems by giving level playing fields to our people, I'm talking of people, I'm not talking of organizations, NGOs and all. Unless we level the playing field for our own people, we'll have these problems. And we also have to realize, as India transforms and rises, it's nice to say India rising, all that. We have a whole huge disparity in India which exists, right? And this disparity gives rise to completely lopsided playing fields. In our quest for going up, now I might sound like a leftist, but you need to look at it from the problem of the poorest Indian. As we grow in this thing, there's more of disparity growing between the rich and the poor. And that will give rise to problems, whether we like it or not. Okay? Unless we are able to bring the poorest Indian up to standard, we'll have these problems going. We have to lift people out of their poverty. It is not as if India has been doing it. I remember sometime back, about 8 to 10 years back, that they said that every year India lifts one Australia out of poverty. It's a tremendous achievement. Okay, but is it enough? No, because people are still there. A lot of people are there who are still below the poverty line. So this disparity itself will give way or give space for others to talk in between and do what they have to do. And this is something we have to contend with, which means that we need to have governments which are, irrespective of the party, governments which are stable and democratic by nature, not by, words alone. You have to. And the good part is this. Whether the BJP is right and the Congress is left or otherwise is an eclectic debate. But you see their performance on ground. Both the governments are performed left of center. The left of center is what their actual performance has been. Okay. When the Prime Minister, when Mr. Modi, who's a rightist, the BJP is a right-leaning setup. But he talks of uplifting the poor and giving free food for the poor, free gas for the poor, building urinals and toilets for the poor. What is he doing? He's occupying the left space, which is required in a country like ours. Till such time we come to a level where we are okay. But then you look at the most developed country like USA. There also there's a left of center space, because as capitalistic and as rich as USA is, there are a lot of people who are in their terms below the poverty line, which need uplifting. You go to Midwest USA, things are bad, right? I went to a place which I called the Bihar of USA. Okay, I'll not name the state because that's not correct. But the situation there was like that. There are townships and villages which have poverty there, real poverty. Okay, so you can't wish this problem away as we go up the value chain. That's the way I look at it. Yeah.
So we are taking one last question by
Yeah.
Evan. And the question is directed towards you. It's regarding the influx of young Chinese migrants entering the United States via the Mexican border and their potential role in internal disruption if noteworthy. In light of this, do you perceive strategic utilization by China to leverage these migrants as agents to sow discord within American universities, particularly concerning global issues such as Israel-Hamas conflict and potentially to exacerbate anti-Indian sentiment?
Sorry, is that for me?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
for
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, according to the 2017 National Intelligence Law in China, every Chinese citizen and Chinese organization has to support Chinese, and that means Chinese Communist Party activities, especially in the intelligence realm. So if they have any family back in China or any business linkages back in China, they're controllable. And if they've left China, China's kept track of them. You don't easily just leave China. So they may have come into the U.S. easily, but they didn't leave China easily. And they know what's expected of them. So in some cases, they may not be directed. In other cases, they may be more directed. And we're seeing it also, by the way. The United States has possessions in the Pacific, including the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, which shares a maritime boundary with Japan. That it's U.S. territory with U.S. citizens, and it's so far deep into the Pacific, it shares a boundary with Japan. And the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Chinese can arrive there without a visa. They can just get off the plane for short-term tourism without a visa. This is a legacy of an attempt to promote tourism in that area. It resulted in the setting up of Chinese-linked casinos that were running more money through them than the casinos in Macau. It's a very unfortunate situation, to put it mildly. And there have been cases of hundreds within the last few months of Chinese who have been then illegally taking boats into Guam from the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas and showing up on U.S. military bases, wandering around U.S. military bases, where they get stopped and then handed over to the FBI. But we've also seen that in California, in the mainland, in the U.S. mainland. So, of the however many there are, tens of thousands who've come into the U.S., like say 1% are bad actors, like probably more, but that's still a lot of people, and very difficult to track. So they don't have to, the ones that you were talking about that are going onto the university campuses, they're coming in as exchange students. And that's a different overt pathway. And I think it's not a coincidence that you'll see the same intersectionality, which is sort of what it's known as, groupings that are against Israel, against India, against certain groupings within the U.S. Coming together to support each other. So I can tell you, I consistently hear in the U.S. From people who should know better about how repressive India is against minorities, and I always ask, give me an example, and there's often very little concrete example they can give. It's just something that they've heard in this miasma of discussions that's floating around the universities and in the media. I think that we mentioned the two groups that want to make India not viable as a country, and they come together definitely on the university campuses in the US. India isn't the only target, but India is, again, as we talked about with China, and as India becomes more important, you're going to be attracting more attention from China. I think you're going to be attracting more attention from the sort of people that you're seeing on the campuses doing the kind of demonstrating that they're doing now. And you could feel that they're trying to build it up in the lead up to the elections, but it's not gaining as much traction as they would want. But it's definitely still an effort, and I don't think it's something that's going to go away, unfortunately.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the answer. I request Sir and Cleo Pascal, ma'am, to give their concluding remarks.
Yeah, madam, all yours.
Okay, good. I don't have to say the actual last word because I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to chat a little bit, but mostly to learn. These were good questions, good, solid, to the point questions, and that's one of India's great strengths, which is the ability to discuss openly, get right to the heart of the issue, and to have an engaged younger generation that's willing to learn from the very experienced older generation that knows the trajectory of the country and can give a clear view of not only where it's been, but where it can head if some of these threats are dealt with in the way that they should be dealt with. So I'd just like to say thank you, and looking forward to the real last word. Over to you, sir.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, madam. At the outset, I must thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to talk with all of you and converse with Mrs. Cleo Pascal. It's been a pleasure. As far as our country is concerned, our country is on the change. And let me tell you, and I'm very bullish about India, because India is restituting it to its past. If you read Joseph Kennedy's book, The Rise and Fall of Empires, it's very clear that India and China at some point of time occupied a large portion of the world economy, and we are just going back there, right? China has already reached that place. It's maybe in the next, say, 15, 20, 30 years, you'll see the shift which is happening. The only difference is that China will start declining, and China will start declining only for one reason, because of its one-child policy, because it's irreversible. And when people decline, the number of people in a place decline, its economy will start going down. So somewhere towards another 15, 20, in fact, in the next 5 years, this differential in power will start showing up very much. It's already started, and that is why we are talking on these terms. In the next 5 years, it's going to be pronounced. In the next 10 years, 15 years, I think it will be absolutely marked, and we will be there. Right? That's the way I look at it. And in this, the role of the youth is huge. Okay. And the role of the youth is huge in taking this country forward. Without the next generation taking this country forward, we are going nowhere. And everyone, that's the way we look at it. And the more important thing is, it's nice to understand the world. I think all of us have to understand ourselves. We have to understand what India is. We have to understand what an Indian who lives in Gujarat is. I have to understand what an Indian who lives in Manipur is. And what an Indian who lives in J&K is, and what an Indian who lives in Kanyakumari is. Okay? That is something which many of us lack. We don't understand what India is. We evaluate India, most of us Indians evaluate India from the metrics around us, in the environment which we live. But there are 10 different Indias living outside your own bubble. The day we can get the understanding of these 10 different Indias, then by going there, right? By going there, it is not by reading about it. You have to go there and understand this country of yours, right? And spend some time. Even if you go for fun out there, it's good enough, right? And India has a lot of fun, let me tell you this. And it's very cheap fun. And that's why it's good. Okay? We will all grow together better. And I've been lucky. My profession has taken me to all parts of India where I have a clear understanding what India is. People talk of poverty in India, but let me tell you, I've seen people with absolutely no income living well in where they are living. And they're living in a jungle and they're living off the land and with very little needs and they're very happy. From a Western or any other prism, that fellow is living below poverty line X, Y, Z. But he's actually living probably at times a better life than you and I are leading. So it's a matter of perspective. Unless you see that India and you understand that India, we will not be the power that we are. But having said that, we need to develop. There's no doubt about it. And that is largely an internal affair. An internally strong India will project more strength outside than anything else. When India grows internally strong, automatically people will start adjusting to it. And you'll see, this business of interference by China or by NGOs or whoever you call them will reduce because their power reduces. And how do you do that? Is by better education, better science, better technology, and better empathy towards each other, better tolerance towards each other's religions, better way of looking at life as a fellow Indian and a fellow human being rather than anything else. When you look at it outside India also, we'll be a better India if we can take all our neighbors along. Because India which grows without its neighbors is going to be a problematic India. Just think, if there's what happens to a skyscraper with slums all around? That won't be a happy skyscraper. So similarly, all the countries around us have to grow along with us. That is something we have to learn to take them along. And only then India will be a stronger India, right? And at this, I'll leave it at that. A stronger India is a stronger internal India, which comes from all of you young people. All the best and wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. With this, we have come to an end of this insightful and timely discussion. I, on behalf of Indic Researchers Forum, would like to thank General P.R. Shankar sir and Cleo Pascal ma'am for the insightful talk. Also grateful to our audience for attending the session.